Hello, everyone. Thank you for learning more about my project on BD. This was an attempt to develop a motivational scale for this behavior. So, when we talk about tobacco use, we often picture sleek cigarettes or e cigarette devices. But in India, the most common form of tobacco looks very different. It's a hand rolled, rough, and costs just a few rupees. It is called Bidi. So, this project began with a simple question: how do we understand motivation when behavior itself is shaped by culture, labor, and other lived experiences? So, this work represents the first quantitative attempt to localize smoking motivation research for India's day laborer, who are basically an underserved group that remains invisible in the mainstream behavioral science. So, just in case you don't know what BDs are, they are the hand rolled cigarettes, mostly hand rolled by women and children, and smoked by millions of men working long hours as daily wage laborers. They are far cheaper than cigarettes but deliver higher nicotine and tar levels, leading to fatal cardiovascular disease and respiratory diseases. They are stronger than cigarettes but cheaper. And in these communities, sharing a bidi is an act of belonging, of rest, of identity. So when I was looking at the existing scale of smoking motivation, every single one was Western. Built for cigarette user, written in English, tested in high literacy population. They worked perfectly well for their context, but they had no translation for the word I wanted to study. So, BD Smoking Motivational Scale, or call it BSMS, was born out of necessity. We needed a measure that could speak the local language, both linguistically and psychologically. So, our objectives were simple yet foundational. We wanted to develop a culturally adapted BD smoking scale, BD smoking motivational scale, BSMS, examine its preliminary factor structure and reliability after cleaning our data set for missingness, explore how these motivational domains might connect with IMHRB dynamic model or integrated multiple health risk behaviors model, which is a broader framework which my colleagues in my lab came up earlier this year to understand multiple integrating health risk behaviors. So, how it started was like we need to collaborate with people who were proficient in both the Hindustani and English languages, have an idea about both the context. So we came up with an English survey that was inspired by some of the well-established smoking surveys, and then we changed them with words that were more context specific and then translated it. And we also added some few more items which were not already there and we thought are important in regards to day laborers with low literacy and in Indian context. So all the material were first developed in English, translated to be used there in India, and then once we came back, we came up with the code book, did all the mapping to move data from paper survey to actual system, and then ran an analysis. There were some challenges, on-site challenges, given uh, the group we were taking data from. So because of illiteracy, around like 95% of people needed assistance in terms of reading out the survey items, but they were very aware like of what was being asked to them. They consented to participate, and that's how we got like about 150 people who filled out our paper survey. So our fieldwork took place in northern India, which is like Uttar Pradesh. That's one of the states there with 150 BD smokers. Almost all interviews were verbal due to high inability to read, not and but they were not surveys on a screen, but they were conversation, and we used simple, culturally resonated phrasing. So instead of saying relaxing, we said aram milta hai. That means if I do direct translation, it means gives me rest. It might sound small, but that linguistic shift changed everything for us. So what we did, we cleaned the data, handled missing values, and finally ran out our first analysis and exploratory factor analysis or EFA using maximum likelihood and Oberlin rotation. Our KMO value was excellent at 0.91 and Bartlett's test was highly significant, confirming data factorability. But it's important to note that it wasn't a full validation yet, just the beginning of seeing what structure lived inside these data. I emphasize this because for population with low literacy and precarious labor, simply achieving a reliable data collection itself is a huge task and a methodological contribution. And on the right side on the screen, you can see all the English and Hindustani version of the material that we used for this study. So, what we found, the kind of pattern we discovered was that in our first run, it revealed something fascinating: four clear motivational domains. Addiction, we can call it more like a physiological pull, and items like almost unbearable without Bidi was something like we used to gauge this domain. Then hedonic, it's more around pleasure. Then for stimulation, the question items are more allowed around alertness. And then in social, it's more about belonging, like others smoke, so it helps me fit in. Together, they explain about 63% of total variance, with the alphas ranging between 0.78 and 0.85. Statistically strong, kind of yes, but also emotionally coherent. And if you can see like the correlation with dependence variable or readiness to quit range from 0.19 to 0.43, indicating somewhat construct validity. So those we can also interpret them as like those more motivated by social and hedonic cues were less ready to quit. And you can see like the data reflected what our participant had been telling us all along the way. BD smoking isn't just addiction, it's a rhythm of life shared and sustained by context. And again, our model is still EFA only, so results should be viewed as an initial structure detection, not confirmatory validation. One more thing I did was like Rejard chart that helps to visualize that bidi smoking isn't only about nicotine addiction. It's about belonging, identity, and micro moment of pleasure and relief amid hard labor. The highest motivation on the radar chart are stimulation and addiction, followed closely by social connection. This mirror lived narrative of workers who smoke to stay alert during long, intense shifts, but also to connect with others. So, so if you see on the right side, all the correlation values are there, and you can see like four-factor EFA reveal distinct yet interrelated motivational domain. So, what do we make of these four domains? Conceptually, BSMS capture reward driven and socially reinforced smoking, which may differ from Western habit dependence dichotomies. For intervention, this means targeting collective norms and stress coping, not just individual motivation or willpower. Now, how does this fit into the larger theoretical work of IMHRB dynamic? So, IMHRB dynamics suggests that behavior doesn't exist in isolation. They are interconnected through shared emotional, cognitive, and social mechanism. A person who smokes to relieve stress may also drink, skip meals, or sleep less. Because the same coping system drives all of those behaviors, the BSMS give us a micro level window into that process. It captured the emotion, we can say reward relief and social identity belonging. I mean, those kind of layers that IMHRB places at the heart of risk clusters. So this small data set become part of much bigger story. One about how emotion and context shape multiple risks at once. Our finding feed into a micro to macro continuum of risk somehow. So you can see, like at the micro level, these BD motives, social, hedonic, stimulation, and addiction, represent the within person motivational structure. At macro level, IMHRB dynamic explain how such motivation accumulate with other risk behaviors like alcohol use, poor diet, or unsafe work practices to form a syndemic clusters that compound health disparities. Thus, BSMS become the first applied test case of IMHRB principle in real world underserved population. So, of course, this is a preliminary analysis. We haven't yet confirmed the model to CFA or tested invariance across group. Our sample was small and mostly men. So some responses were interview assisted, which means we are still learning how literacy and setting might shape reliability. But even at this early stage, the EFA told us that structure exists, and that's powerful. It means we can now build, refine, and test a culturally valid measure when none existed before. Despite these limits, BSMS has three major implications: scientific equity, it localizes measurement science, moving away from importing Western tool to building culturally concurrent metrics. Behavioral insight, it reframes really smoking not only as an addiction but as a psychosocial coping strategy for stress and belonging. Global relevance. It operates IMHRB's idea that multiple behaviors interact through shared emotional and social mechanism, directly informing World Health Organization equity targets and Healthy People 2030's health equity targets. So, like I said, like what this work show is that science can both be rigorous and relational. For researcher, BSMS is an invitation to rethink validation as a dialogue, not a download from the global north. For practitioner, it's a reminder that intervention need to target belonging and collective coping, not just a nicotine dependence. Our next steps that we thought is like we might do confirmatory factor analysis across North versus South Indian sample to test structure stability, embed BSMS score within IMHRB dynamic framework to model co-occurring risks like BD, alcohol, poor diet, etc. And maybe compare BD versus cigarette smokers to understand how culture context shapes motivation pattern. This progression will convert a preliminary tool into a validated scale ready for policy and intervention research. So, the major takeaway I can say from what we started as a small field project became a lesson in equity, translation, and trust. The BSMS is more than a scale, it's a step towards what I call measurement equity, where tools speak the language of the people they study. And by connecting it to IMHRB, we are not just understanding BD smokers, we are illuminating how social, emotional, and cultural forces intertwine in every health behavior around the world. That's the power of local data with global meaning. Thank you so much. If you're interested in learning more about this project, please feel free to reach out to me on one of the social media on the screen or write an email to me. Some of the key references are mentioned here, and also you can scan the code for the full list of references. Thank you so much.